Hey, what's going on? This is the week one November weekly review. We're going to be focusing on the indices today, specifically S&P and NASDAQ. I got some music going in the background. You might not be able to hear it. That's what I'm, anticipating, but if you do, that's what it is. We'll start with ES, right? Ticker symbol for S&P. So, yeah, man, I mean, we got about, 30 slides or so to go through. So either way, right? Really focusing on the weekly range with this presentation, really just with the weekly review as well. Um, essentially looking at this 3 week look back, which includes the week that we just saw, right? So this was this week's price action here. Consolidation during Monday, expansion lower, retracement to expansion is sort of like the weekly situation, the weekly price engine delivery. Very interesting, right? And we'll see how that breaks down, day to day as well. But also fascinating, right? The Monday high and low, or excuse me, the weekly high and low, that Monday Friday template as far as like a weekly expansion. So we see that, that full expansion all the way into Friday. So that is its own situation. The Monday Friday weekly expansion template versus something like the Tuesday Thursday weekly expansion template. Also interesting as well. I mean, the way that the equal lows, like this like major sell side as classified as low of day, puts in those equal lows for that weekly induction, providing liquidity for that consolidation to expansion. Yeah, again, this is yes here. We have that 254 handle weekly range. So all this is like ultimately data to be collected week to week, right? And then ultimately, like, to get sort of a look back perspective, like a running data, going back at least like 20, 30 weeks. So yeah, we got the Monday consolidation here leading into, right, Tuesday continues the expansion that ultimately started in the Asian session, which is fascinating as well, right? Typically, we don't think of the Asian session as like a, key time frame, if you will. Normally, it's almost a kind of like a liquidity generation point. But it's fascinating how that Monday Asian session ultimately is the beginning of the expansion and, simultaneously how that occurs, at 1800. So very fascinating as well. But either way, Tuesday essentially continues that expansion, right? Very quote unquote heavy day here for Tuesday. We don't even have a manipulation window above that Tuesday AMD. It is fascinating. I mean, right, we return to the AMD, but again, just like really, again, heavy day, right? Retracement, induction of longs to then trade lower. So this is, a fascinating day. Within this as well, we don't talk about it in this slideshow, but the AM PM templates within each day as well, very fascinating. If I remember correctly, this was like nine, like this was the 9 o'clock candle, the 9 a.m. candle, right? So within that, we have that opening range, that 9:30 opening, and ultimately, excuse me, ultimately that Judas swing. I believe this was 10 a.m., right? To then expand lower. So, potentially like AM expansion, PM expansion. And, what follows expansion, that consolidation. So, we see that expansion ultimately like some type of retracement that then eventually is just back to consolidation. So uh, very interesting day on Tuesday, but specifically like this as its own thing to study. God damn, excuse me. Just trying to clear my fucking throat. But this is the specific observation of Monday to Tuesday consolidation to expansion as its own thing to study. Um, Essentially coming from this perspective of, you know, Monday as that like consolidation day as essentially the liquidity generation day for the week. Um, in that Monday Tuesday relationship, and in this case, that Monday Asian session, very fascinating. So yeah, into the Wednesday, we see that reversal, right? Like out of the out of that Tuesday expansion, from the Asian session perspective, right? We consolidate during the Asian sessions and then expand. But from this you know, continued perspective, the continued price engine perspective, from the expansion of Tuesday, we ultimately go into some type of reversal, especially as we trade to and through the Tuesday high. That like officially, for sure clarifies the reversal there. Nonetheless, reversal is Judas swing, right? Intraday retracement, ultimately as intra-week consolidation. Consolidation ultimately leads to expansion, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into that, but very fascinating situation here, right? Like this as that almost anticipated move for the Wednesday template, and like Wednesday as its own characteristic of study, right? In the way that we kind of study the Monday Tuesday relationship. What does Wednesday do in relation to that as well, right? As its own, situation and like that sort of man, what's the word? Like tree of potentials. Um on to Thursday, right? We see that, essentially consolidation to expansion as Judas swing, reversal is stop hunt intraday, right? But back to the intra-week perspective, we see consolidation after Wednesday's reversal, and then we expand and go back to consolidation, plain and simple. So very fascinating there. Breaking it down, breaking it down on the lower time frames. We see the Judas swing, we see the reversal, and specifically we've just kind of been hitting on the difference, or we've been hitting on the price engine, but the difference between intra-week and intraday delivery. Finally, on to Friday, right? We continue that consolidation that we saw in Thursday, right? Really just that continuation. So, this technically could have just been expansion to reversal. But again, same concept of the price engine. What happens after consolidation, we expand. What happens after this expansion, we reverse, right? As far as we were classifying Wednesday's reversal as a reversal because it traded to and through previous day's high. We don't necessarily need to see that. I mean, this is like a obvious reversal here. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a retracement simply due to like, I mean, well, the velocity. I don't even know if that's like a quantifiable number, but simply like um, the institutional sponsorship of this move higher after trading to and through that 3 day look back low, the low of week from like a couple weeks ago. Um, so yeah, pretty fascinating. There's sort of that question though, that subtle question of like what ultimately defines a reversal and how is it different from a retracement? Is it that? Is it that concept of like it has to trade to and excuse me, trade to and through, the intraday high or previous day's high in this case, right, as we're talking about. But yeah, kind of fascinating question, right? But then understanding, right, this is the 1 hour chart breaking down into the 15, like there were session highs, there were AM trailed stops, etc. Um, that whole concept is like, intraday definitely reversal. So fascinating. Simultaneously, I don't remember where 9 a.m. was, but it was, somewhere in this area. So we definitely see that AM expansion, PM reversal, um, template as well. Compared to a Tuesday AM expansion. I mean, ultimately, like part of this was the AM open. The AM open is like somewhere up in here, but it ultimately closes as that expansion lower. PM ultimately goes lower as well. Um, so yeah, as far as Wednesday, same sort of concept. AM open is somewhere in here roughly. Potential AM expansion, PM reversal. But like the reversal as just like retracement. Either way, that AM expansion, PM reversal, like plain and simple question of observation looking back at a previous day. Was it AM expansion, PM expansion, or AM expansion, PM reversal, or something else? So yeah, now getting into like a time and range perspective. When was the high of day? When was the low of day? Again, this is like 1 hour data. So we see the Monday, very interesting day. The high of day and low of day put in place at 10. That is a sign of like manipulation, basically, right? Also kind of a sign of high resistance. Fascinating as well the whole day, right? We already looked at it with the price engine, but like we see that consolidation, right? We also see the AMD. I mean, just, high resistance. Either way, 60 handle daily range. That's, not a very large day. Simultaneously, before we continue, just want to say like true day. What does true day mean? That's the day defined as like, the start at, 00, that New York midnight, and then it ends essentially at, 16:59. So like 1800 is the start of the Asian session, and that's officially like not part of the quote unquote true day. So, there could be like that perspective versus like, the algorithmic day or whatever you want to call it. I really don't know, but literally going from like New York midnight to New York midnight. Um, so yeah, different perspectives, different ways to collect data, and ultimately like, the difference between those data points could be like some sort of observation as well. So yeah, Tuesday, very interesting day. These types of days do, fascinate me personally as far as like high of day or low of day being put in place during that first hour of the day. That's always its own interesting look. And ultimately, like that impulse swing during that first hour. Um, so it's interesting how that manifests as that low of day on this day. And we put in that Tuesday, you know, again, like good example of the true day situation here. 1800 open is this candle. Asian session continues lower. But I mean, from a, true day perspective, the low of day is here. So fascinating, right? Overall. Um, Wednesday, again, see that high of day put in place during lunch. See a couple lunch high of days and low of days this week. And, classic um, AMD type of template day as like intra-week reversal. this has its own type of look, its own Wednesday. Anticipation is fascinating. And it's just the algorithmic nature, right? The violation of the SIBI, violation of high of day, um, all potential kind of, looks for this type of a day. So this will be interesting to see as well. It's like weekly situation. So yeah, on to Thursday. Its own sort of situation as well to continue to study and anticipate is like the Wednesday, Thursday market maker situation and the way that that could potentially present itself, like in the various potential weekly deliveries, the price action delivery of the week. So we see that, essentially like buy side breakout inducement of the breakouts, right? Buy side delivery, violation of the BISI, one final induction, or excuse me, one final induction long, right? To then continue lower for the week, right? Ultimately, like closing lower. So that as its own situation is fascinating, right? That market maker situation and the way that liquidity is, used and, generated and neutralized and generated and neutralized, et cetera. So, this Thursday, you know, again, that lunch low, and we see that retracement. So that lunch high and then that retracement. So like that is its own look as well is fascinating. Um, again, like, larger day. And then on to Friday here again, larger day. Potential classification with ES here specifically of like is the daily range larger than 100 handles? Sort of defining like these lower range days. You know, Either way, we see that London high of day as well here. Always like a classic look. And then again, the low of day at lunch. Very fascinating. 3 out of the 5 days last week, the higher low of the day formed like literally during the lunch hour. So that's interesting, right? That almost infers like PM retracement. Not necessarily, right? Could ultimately be like PM consolidation, but it could also be PM retracement slash PM reversal, which it is multiple times. So that's fascinating. Um, just simply as its own study. I mean, I feel like I've sort of, I don't know, like there's something about lunch that doesn't seem like it would put in the low of day or high of day. Um, and so it's just interesting how the algorithm has been, delivering price. Another classic look, like really nice kind of setup um, for this, Monday, or excuse me, this Friday London. Friday London, Friday overnight session as its own sort of observation. This is something I've been trying to collect data on. Um, it's just like Friday. Friday as its own sort of type of day in the way that like we've sort of developed characteristics or simply put, there's been like different sort of behaviors of each day. And so it's fascinating to see that, that London high of day here. And simultaneously that Judas swing, leading up to the London. And so this has its own, market maker situation as well. So we got like two market maker situations to study. Um, ultimately three with like the Tuesday retracement, then the follow up, retracement, follow up, retracement, follow up, and then ultimately four here, right? This was our AM expansion PM reversal. So yeah, now literally same thing, but now NASDAQ. So these are correlated markets. You'll see like basically the same thing, but at the same time too, you'll notice some differences, and that's really the observation here is like the intermarket analysis. Um, Yeah, so again, weekly range for NASDAQ. Again, we see that consolidation during Monday. And again, the sort of sell side liquidity generation. And, just sort of, to quickly, like, sort of, like, take a picture of this in your mind, like, different sort of look, but it's also the same, you know? So either way, we see that Monday consolidation, that Tuesday expansion, retracement, expansion. Very fascinating, right? If you remember on ES, we traded basically to the Monday, or excuse me, the Tuesday open. Here on NASDAQ, we don't do that. It's like an even heavier situation. So that is its own observation, right? Simultaneously, like, I mean, this really is ultimately first presented fair value gap of the day here off of the 1 hour. Um, and so that as its own look is fascinating. Either way, we see that expansion, retracement, expansion, really get going. Um, and there's simply like a difference in the NASDAQ and ES delivery. On NASDAQ, this was the New York PM session. Like New York PM was somewhere in here, basically, like going lower. And if you remember on ES basically consolidated. And so we see some type of like, you know, divergence technically. And so, we saw that follow up in Asian um, for ES when on NASDAQ it was already doing that. But nonetheless, we see, continued follow up in that Asian. But again, interesting observation as far as these, these technically like these different markets that are highly correlated. But we see where, there's potential, quote unquote divergence. So again, same concept, right? Reversal to consolidation. Interesting here on NASDAQ that we don't trade to and through previous day's high, right? We just put in equal highs. We just put in this buy side liquidity pool. So that's fascinating as well, right? This example of like quote like true, like divergence where correlated markets, one makes a higher high, the other makes that lower high as an indication of that, false move. And so, not like that is not the like signal to buy or like that alone should not be the reason that you take activity or take risk in the market. But just as like a additional, almost like an additional classification of, sort of like a tipping of the hand of, algorithmic manipulation essentially. Um, we see that here. And really the way that that lines up with this reversal. And so that's sort of that question, we were talking about earlier with ES is this retracement, is this reversal? Um, but either way, we did see that consolidation. Back to Thursday, right? Similar action. Really nice look, honestly. Like this whole situation on Thursday was very nice. The way that Asian consolidated, the way that we Judas swing above the high, or excuse me, oh yeah, above the high, the way that we make new highs, delivering that buy side early day, delivering the high of day, trading above, Asian session high, above the AMD, turtle soup type of look, right? Ultimately, just like redelivery, repricing of the SIBI, respect being shown to the SIBI, respect shown to previous day's high or whatever. I mean, not or whatever, that's literally what it was, but like that is its own sort of situation to then trade lower. So, we see that consolidation to expansion, back to the consolidation. And then again, same situation that we saw in ES, but we don't see as much volatility in NASDAQ, which was pretty fascinating. as far as consolidation, expansion, reversals. I was watching this in real time, um, and it was fascinating because Nasdaq was ultimately like the quote unquote laggard um, behind ES, and so that was fascinating, right? We saw kind of like two examples of that this week, where ES, or well, first example is where Nasdaq here is expanding lower while ES is consolidating. And then, second example here is ES is like, you know, running considerably, um, while Nasdaq eventually got there, but took a while, right? You can even just see it there, right? ES is above daily open, Nasdaq is not. So that is its own situation as well. It's fascinating. So yeah, same situation here with Nasdaq. Remember on ES how you know the high and low of the day was formed at 10 here on Nasdaq. We had that low of day actually put in place at 2. On ES, we see that stop hunt to and through that London low. Here on Nasdaq, it holds. So another example of divergence here on Monday within this consolidation. So that's pretty interesting, right? Like the intermarket relationships in that consolidation environment. Either way, that 250 handle daily range, right? On to Tuesday here again. We see that Tuesday, low of day. And then, yeah, same thing, right? On ES, that low of day was at 5. Tuesday here, we see sell side delivery right up until, that 2-day close. So pretty fascinating. Fascinating again, another example of divergence. On to Wednesday there. Just trying to get rid of this little pop up. On to Wednesday here, we see that low of day. And ultimately, that high of day being put in place like a couple hours later, right? That high of day for ES on Wednesday here was at 12, right? If you'll remember, here on Wednesday it's at 14 for Nasdaq. So another example of divergence, and that 476 handle daily range. So here we got Thursday. And very interesting, right? High of day at 8 again. Same situation happened on ES, but that low of day at 12. And just like this retracement overall is fascinating to then like consolidate. And we got Friday here. Again, same situation, that high of day, that London high of day, and that lunch low. Very fascinating. So yeah, here's kind of like a different perspective of the Asian session. So we got ES first. So there were 5 Asian sessions if you include the Sunday Asian session. So it's fascinating to study like what the day did um, in relation to the Asian session. And so, we're traditionally anticipating that Asian is essentially like consolidation. And it's worth noting, like, the average range of the Asian session as well. And that continues to essentially like give opportunity for anticipation of what's going to happen for the day. So either way, this day is fascinating how we see that consolidation in Asian, and ultimately it leads to the consolidation Monday there for Sunday. Also fascinating, right? I mean, this is that new week opening gap. So we see that consolidation above the new week opening gap. So that is its own look. Like if we see that consolidation above it early week, so that ultimately leads to lower prices, vice versa if below it early week. So yeah, here we see the Monday Asian session. Very interesting, kind of hard to see here. But we have this breakaway gap. guess this should say A, but this breakaway gap that wasn't, repriced, left open, if you will, as we move from the consolidation to expansion. So that is its own situation. And very fascinating how it happens during the Asian session here. We have that 38 handle Asian session. So it's like the difference in the Asian sessions there. We have this consolidation Asian session, we have this expansion Asian session. On to the Tuesday Asian session here. Ultimately, like expansion to retracement to then go, to consolidation, to like then do its, but like the true Asian session here was a expansion to retracement. So that's its own little market making situation as well. Pretty fascinating. But it's interesting how we've seen, like we see the Tuesday Asian session, the Monday Asian session, um, you know, like larger than 30 handles, larger than 25 handles. And we see that Monday Asian session was quite small. And so we see these like expansion type of looks during Asian session. That in of itself is kind of fascinating. Um, but again, ideally looking for that Asian session consolidation. So here we see that Wednesday Asian session consolidation again, like, you know, below 30 handles, if you will. Consolidation ultimately providing liquidity on both sides to then, go lower. So very, very nice. And ultimately, same move again. The next Asian session, the Thursday excuse me, Asian session for that 20. I mean, so again, like very fascinating algorithmically, less than 30 handles, all of those consolidations. So same observations here for NASDAQ. See that consolidation, right? This should say Sunday. Now onto the Monday, we see again breakaway gap. The Tuesday here, nearly a 300 handle Asian range. Again, expansion to retracement. And then very fascinating as well, we ultimately put in this inversion fair value gap in the Asian session, right? We saw that breakaway gap in the Asian session. See this inversion fair value gap in the Asian session. That ultimately was sort of like the foundation or the even the higher time frame array, like within the market making situation here to like reverse. That was sort of that trigger we retraced to the bottom of it, which is a fascinating look in and of itself. Um, Change in the state of delivery within that as well, and then ultimately expand higher. But it's fascinating how that array was put in place during the Asian session. Again, that consolidation. Technically, there is a little fair value gap right here, a little SIBI, and so we do see some type of inversion fair value gap. But again, really looking for that consolidation. And same consolidation situation. Also, there is, same situation, little fair value gap in there. So, two examples of like, Asian session being traded above simultaneously, that like parental structure being respected, ultimately respecting the array here of the fair value gap, respecting the order block here. Then, violating that BISI as well, trading lower. So, very fascinating, those, basically just those Asian range situations as well. So this is just something that I was thinking about, right? Like potential kind of, question to wrap up here, or just something to think about, really. There's 6 1-hour candles in the Asian session, so this is like 24 1-hour Asian session candles per week. Um, well, actually, no, this is 30 if you include Sunday. So, you know, all this like this and this includes Sunday. So, that yeah, there are 6 1-hour. So this is 31 hour Asian session candles per week. And then there are 17 1 hour candles in the true day. This is 85 1 hour true day candles per week. And so, a basic sort of like awareness of like when are we in the Asian session? What candle of the Asian session are we in on? Um, Same thing, true day. Same thing for the algorithmic day. Same thing, for the week, um, and for the month, etc. So kind of fascinating bringing into this like 1 hour candle awareness, and ultimately like how many of these 1 hour candles from last week were up close candles and down close candles, within this range, within this sell side delivery ultimately. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much all I got. Thanks for watching.